What up, everybody? Welcome to the Frequency and Faith channel. My name is Cody, and today, still on the topic of transitions. It's Sunday, some people's Sabbath, big chilling. Got my feet up on the desk. Man, transitions are difficult. Today, I've honestly felt it's so weird. I was uh, I was gone from my church serving for like 2 weeks because I was on call because I volunteered to cover a couple friends on my team's on call. For those that don't know, I'm a programmer on a credit card team. So if you had a credit card for the bank I program for, you would you'd be using the credit card that my team and department enables on the back end, right? We make that credit card work. And so I was gone for 2 weeks serving. When I was back, when you transition from one thing to the next, it requires you leaving what you used to be in, right? Like I spoke on that with Abraham when he was called by God to leave his family, his house, his father's house, his family, his land, everything, right? And let me tell you what, when I came back today, usually when you have 2 weeks of break from something and you come back, you usually come back like invigorated. I did not feel that at all. It was sad for me. I actually am I straight up teared up about it and cried a little bit about it. I feel like my time serving at the church I serve, Life Church, church I serve at, might be coming to an end. It doesn't mean that my time serving will come to an end because I look at this as a form of serving, right? I'm just in it's a different platform, a different medium. But that's hard for me because, man, I love serving there. But that was never like my end all be all. And I knew that someday I would have to change and go out from there, right? Like I will always leave something if God calls me to go somewhere else. But yeah, and I'm not saying that's for sure. That's so hard to do, to leave stuff you're comfortable with and go on to something else, especially when it's something that you're good at or something that brings you joy. It's like maybe this thing is actually like good for me, but it doesn't really matter because maybe God was just using it as a testing bed or a place. Maybe God was just using it as something to shape and form you into what he wants you to do, right? Later on, like he's put me in a lot of different places over the years in my life. And sometimes I don't really understand why I'm there. When I look back, I always do. But he'll put me in these places and I look back now and I can see the character traits that he's built in me over time that can be used to further his kingdom and spread his word, right? And I don't even know what the end point of that looks like. I don't know I don't know what that's going to look like at all. I have no idea. Ugh, so that's been on my mind a lot lately, especially today. Sometimes you have to leave stuff that you really like in order to get to where God wants you to go. You know, I've heard other people say it too, but it's like I'm scared. I'm always scared when I stop doing one thing in order to go to the next, but I'm more afraid of not doing it because I don't ever want to settle and I don't ever want to think like there could have been more for me. I'll never settle for anything in my life ever again. Knowingly, anyway. You can unknowingly settle for a lot of things. Because when you've been doing something for so long, like what if when you're transitioning, God calls you to move away from something that is actually producing fruit from the seeds that you're sowing into that field, and you can unknowingly spoil your harvest in the promised land because you are having a fruitful harvest in the wilderness. I'll say that again. Sometimes you can spoil the greater harvest that God has for you in the promised land because you're too busy harvesting in the wilderness from the seeds you've sown in the wilderness. But He never intended for you to stay here. Not this long, right? So you may have stuff that like adds value to your life now, but God has something greater for you, and you're too afraid to leave what you're doing now in order to get to the next thing God has for you, right? And one thing that terrifies me more than anything, I don't ever want to think that I'm not doing what He wants me to do. You know, there's a passage that I read just recently that plays into this a little bit. Let me grab my mouse here. I forgot I've had this mouse for so long that I forgot it was wireless. There's a lesson there. You can do something for so long or use a tool for so long, you can forget that the tool has dual purpose. You could probably apply that to relationships too. You can have a friendship with somebody and maybe you only know one side of them, and there's a whole nother side you've never even been introduced to. Maybe your communication hasn't opened up to the point where you're that transparent with each other, or maybe it has and there's been like little gleamings of it here and there. And then you can go on into the future and just forget that that was ever a possibility because your thinking was too small, or you just got way too used to what you've been doing forever. Just like this mouse, I was using it all plugged in forever. And then I looked at it, I looked at the bottom of it, and I was like, oh, I can take out the cord and it's wireless. That's crazy. That goes into something I was thinking, not to go in a rabbit hole, but I've been living in Omaha, Bellevue, for a while now. And it's crazy how other people here will tell me about things that are like near me that I've never known about. Like you can live in a location for a long time and not really enjoy the fullness of it. I've been thinking about that a lot lately too. We'll go into that here in a moment. But there was a passage that I read recently in Acts when it was talking about how the apostles and Peter were being persecuted by the high priests and the party of Sadducees because they were jealous of the apostles. And they put them in jail and then they brought them to trial. And I'm going to start in Acts chapter 5, verse 27. I'll probably put some text on here in the line. I'm trying to practice at getting better at Adobe Premiere Pro. It's a journey that you guys are along with me too. So Acts chapter 5, starting at verse 27. The apostles were brought in and made to appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high priest. We gave you strict orders not to teach in his name, he said. Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood. They're referring to Jesus because the apostles were spreading the word of Jesus and what he did on the cross. Picking up at verse 28, Peter and the other apostles replied, we must obey God rather than human beings. The God of our ancestors raised Jesus from the dead, whom you killed by hanging him on a cross. God exalted him to his own right hand as Prince and Savior, that he might bring Israel to repentance and forgive their sins. We are witnesses of these things, and so is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those whom obey him. And then it says in verse 33, When they heard this, they were furious and wanted to put them to death. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, who was honored by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside for a little while. So this Pharisee, which I think the pronouncement is Gamaliel, I'm not sure. Don't be too harsh on me. he tells the Pharisees to go inside and they're going to have a meeting about this. He's like putting a stop to it. And he says, then he addressed the Sanhedrin. Men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do to these men. Some time ago, Theodas appeared claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, all his followers were dispersed, and it all came to nothing. After him, Judas the Galilean appeared in the days of the census and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone. Let them go. For if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourselves fighting against God. His speech persuaded them. They called the apostles in and had them flogged. Then they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus and let them go. The apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. Amen. That's awesome. He brings up a good point that I think about when it comes to transitions is if I'm worried about something stopping me and I'm worried about leaving something to go to something else, if it's of God, nothing will stop it. If it's of human origin, it'll probably fail or it can be stopped, right? But if it's of God, nothing will stop it. And anyone who tries to stop it, they'll be fighting God, not just you. And that's not a winning battle for anybody. That's so empowering. So today, as I'm just thinking about how myself serving at a church may be coming to a close, if God's really calling me to do that, I won't be done serving, period, right? But I can see how God would have had me serve there initially to build me up for that, right? Because I'd never be doing this podcast and speaking out of the Bible or anything unless He would have first planted me there. And the place that I was at before that was nowhere near that. My faith wasn't anywhere near it. And I would not be able to do this or this, right? I would not be able to do it. So I know God could have just had me there to build me up while my knowledge base of the Bible has been growing as I've read it all the way through. I don't even know. I think I'm on my second time all the way through, maybe my third. I'm not sure. But my knowledge of the Bible has grown exponentially, right? And even if that were the case, until I started serving at Life Church, I would have never been comfortable enough with like leading people in the word anyway, ever. Because some people would look at their lives and be like, I'm serving in church, I'm leading kids, I do the 4th through 6th graders on Sundays. And me being there enables other leaders to serve because their kids are in there, right? Which I still am a proponent of myself doing. But time and time again, they say that God will give you irritation towards things when He calls you to certain things, right? And time again, I'm just thinking, I never started serving at this church for completely my own reasons anyway. And it has totally turned into something where I'm not here for the church. I'm not here for anybody. I'm totally here to serve God. And I can serve God anywhere. I can serve God on the internet, for instance, like this. And when I was referring to that like divine irritation, they say, I'll be thinking to myself in that room, as the message is going on the screen. And we have like a curriculum that we have to follow and whatnot. And we're allowed to stray off the path a little bit, and freestyle and do our thing. When I first got there, I was at a point where I needed to follow the curriculum 100%, right? But my knowledge base of theology and the Bible and leading others in the word has grown exponentially since I first started serving there. And now I can look at that pamphlet and I see the message on the screen and I get the same feeling that I had before I left the previous church to go to that church, wherein I'm, and I don't mean this in a sense of selfishness or egotism, but I just feel like God could use my knowledge base elsewhere to further the kingdom greater than here. Like there's others that could take my place in here and do this job adequately and better than I'm doing here. But I can do stuff in other areas that they can't do. God will call you to things that he has uniquely made you capable of having grand success in that only you can do. And it's your job to execute. It's your job to complete the mission. God's not going to force you out of the place that you're in currently. Sometimes he does, I guess. I shouldn't say he doesn't ever do that, because there's times, like I said in the previous episode, where God has slammed the door shut in my face, for sure. But not all the time, man. Not all the time. People are inherently selfish as well. And I don't mean this in a judgmental sense. I am too. Like we just are. We're wired that way to survive. And like I was saying in the previous episode, no one's going to care about what you're called to as much as you. No one's going to make things happen. You have to open doors with your own voice sometimes and with your own actions and steps. There's stuff going on at my work now where stuff that I've been praying about since back before when I was unemployed. I wrote down during that time when I was just lost and I just was like, dude, I'm done doing everything my way. I'll try it your way, God. And let's just do that, because I've tried it my way forever. I'm tired of it. The results suck. It is trash. And I did that, and I wrote down this huge 100-point prayer list thing. And some of the things on there are really insane. And believe it or not, like half of it or 3/4 of it are crossed off. And I'm talking crazy stuff like salary numbers, resource numbers such as time, knowledge bases being built, relationships being built, emotional stability. And one of those things on there was for me to have an opportunity arise at my, well, at that point when I wrote it, I was unemployed, so I didn't have a company. But I was just like, God, will you please make this happen somehow? This is before I ever talked to anybody for interviews regarding any of the things that are happening right now. I'm pretty sure when I wrote that, I'd been to a couple interviews, but I was never, oh yeah, at that point, I didn't even think I was going to be programming in the language that I am now. That's crazy. So yeah, wow. Wow. Things that I wrote down then are happening, coming to fruition years later, but they're not just happening in the way that I wrote them. They're happening plus more. God used my previous, wow. I just now got this revelation. So I program in the language that's very old. It's like 60 years old. And when I went unemployed for my previous job, I was like, I'm never going to do that again. My passion was to program in a newer language. And now opportunity is arising where my knowledge of newer tech and older tech are coming to a head in a segue where they're going to feed off each other some way, whether directly or indirectly, right? So my gifts from my passions for newer technology is starting to come into play in my job now. And it's things that I've been praying about for a long time, years ago, before I ever knew this opportunity would rise. And I'm just now realizing that back then I wrote down that I would be a person that would use the new technology. But when I wrote that, I didn't know that God was going to use my knowledge base of the old tech or like the minor experience I had with that old tech in combination with my passion of the new tech to bring about something even greater. God's so good. He really truly doesn't waste anything. So yeah, doors are opening at my job that I've had written down in this 100-point prayer list for years. And I just now realized that my dreams, my 100-point prayer list wasn't big enough for what's happening. God's crazy, man. He's so good. I am you know, if any of you out there ever felt like you've had a hard time leaving what you were previously at to go get what God has for you, or just not even what God has for you, just in general. It's hard leaving things that you're used to get something better. It's so hard because it's comfortable where you're at. And I'm like a person that's really loyal to people. I really respect people's time. And I'm really grateful for people that like pour into me and teach me things. I'm so grateful when someone teaches me something because I just come out of it so much greater, right? Because like knowledge is next to God, man. Knowledge is my most valued resource, probably. I don't, perhaps. I've never really thought about that till now. Huh. But just how I'm wired, like, I love to problem solve. I love learning so much. I'm obsessed with it, really. And my intimate relationships, and I'm not saying intimate as in sexual with like a woman, as in a girlfriend or anything. I mean, my my relational life in general suffers from my obsessiveness with learning and bettering myself. And it's a price that I'm willing to pay. I do believe God will bring people into my close circle and provide me a wife someday. But, I'm extremely happy doing what I'm doing. That's another revelation I kind of just had this past week is a lot of advice out there that I was following, which I needed at the time when I first heard it, would tell me that I have to do X, Y, and Z in order to be productive. And I needed X, Y, and Z rest from a subject, or else I'm going to get burned out. It's not healthy for me. And something I've been really leaning into now is, you know, God wired me a certain way. I kept finding that on like Saturdays and Sundays, I would become like depressed. And it would happen consistent enough where I was like, this is a problem that I need to address. And I felt like if I don't rest on Saturday and Sunday, like not quote unquote work, I'm going to burn out. And it's simply, I don't think it's true for me. And people can hear this and be like, oh, so you just think you're special. And it's like, no, I just think I love learning and doing what I do every day so much that I don't need to take a complete rest day like everybody else. Like, I gain so much enjoyment from just painting. Like, look, like that table, man. I love painting and art. And I've switched my schedule around to wake up at like 5 every morning. And I've just changed everything to wake up earlier, and I get like the important stuff that I'm too tired to usually do at night out of the way. Like, I paint for like an hour and a half. I read my Bible first for an hour, and pray to the Lord. And then I do concussion rehab exercises for half an hour. And then I paint for like an hour and a half, 2 hours every day. And it's been bringing me so much joy. So I go through this like schedule all week long. And then Saturdays and Sundays, Saturday is my hardest day physically. But once like 1:30 hits on Saturdays, I'm kind of into like rest mode, kind of. I would study programming for another like 2 hours. And then when 3 hits, 3:30, I would just have like nothing scheduled, you know? And let me tell you what, enough times where I noticed this is for sure an issue for me is I would become like sad. At first, I thought it was like work addiction or, all these things that people label it as. But I don't think that's true for me. I don't. I don't need a break from the things that I do. And I don't mean like working out and physically, like physically your muscles need time to regenerate and your brain needs time to regenerate from certain things, right? But past couple Saturdays, right? Or at least I know for sure. Yeah, this Saturday was the first time that I implemented it 100% where I like made an objective list to go for Saturday and Sunday that I wanted to get done. So it kept my mind on track. And I was so happy. Like, I just studied code anyway. And I worked on the podcast anyway. And I've been painting, working on my artistic skills and world building behind when I paint like miniatures for this game called Warhammer, a tabletop war game. I go through like the lore building in my head and I build the world of this, like the scenery of the organisms that reside within the environment that I create that in my head. Like world build, right? Like, I create a backstory for everything. I create a concept board. I get real nerdy and passionate about it. And I love it. And I'm good at it when I pour myself into it. And there were so many activities that I felt like because of all these things that I heard on the internet and read on the internet, where if I don't take a break from these things, I'll burn out. I didn't do them and I'd get like weird. I say weird, but like sad. I'd feel like at the end of Saturday and Sunday, I would go and do things during my rest time that I thought was resting, but it would never really bring me value or joy. It was like, I feel like I should be rested right now because I just did nothing, and doing nothing is doing something, right? Actually, like and I'm not telling anyone to be a workaholic like me. This is only for me. What I'm just saying is only for me and what God's called me to. This is how I'm wired. I love learning and it makes me happy. If I was super exhausted with programming during a Saturday or Sunday, and I was like, I consciously know that this is too much for me right now and I feel burnout, I would not do it. Right? I'm wise enough to know that. And there was a time where I think that resting on Saturdays and Sundays in a more typically accepted fashion would have been right for me. But I think I've gotten to a place mature wise and I know myself and what I feel like before I hit huge burnout that I can gauge my psychology and be like, I'm not there yet. This is just bullshit. I'm good to go. And the devil will trick me to like not do anything because I think I'm getting burned out. But then at the end of the day, I just feel worse because I didn't do anything that brought me happiness. So, yeah, I say all of that to say, what works for other people might not work for you. And don't listen to everything you hear on the internet because not everyone's built like you. And God will specifically and uniquely design you to carry out the activities that He's called you to. And what brings me joy doesn't bring other people joy, and vice versa. And that's fine because God has a unique task for me that I am going to accomplish, and no one else can. And other people are assigned stuff that I could never do ever. And I wouldn't try because I don't have the grace for it. So, yeah, that's stuff that's been on my mind a lot lately. It's Man, that was such a blessing. In these past 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, I felt really, really happy. And I've been staying off of social media more, which is another thing I feel that I had a revelation about. I don't want to use the word revelation so loosely, but I felt like I had a breakthrough where I was like, I felt God spoke to me one time, giving me several points. And you can think I'm crazy, I don't care, because they're coming true. But I felt one of them, he said, he was saying, don't don't idolize anything, and don't take up the customs and the traditions of the territory, the culture of the territory that you're taking over, right? When I feel like I'm called to do things in the digital landscape, for instance, like I was saying in the last episode, I don't know if I'm what my presence is going to be on social media, and I felt like I got clarity on that because I prayed about it and asked for it. And you remind me of a point that he gave me weeks ago, and it was saying that don't take up the idols, the culture, the traditions of the territory that I've brought you into, and that I'm bringing or calling you to. And I really think what that means for me is I don't need to be on social media in order for all of this to work, in order for God to use it however He wants to use it. I don't think I need to do that. And yeah, I don't care. I don't care about the subscriber numbers. I don't care about the likes or the validation or any of that. I don't I don't need to. I feel like God's called me to specifically do it the way that I'm going to do it, and I'm completely open to being wrong. I love being wrong. A lot of people don't like being wrong, but I love being wrong because then it'll let me embrace the truth, and the truth will empower me to do what God's called me to do better than just going along ignorantly doing it the way that I was before the truth was unveiled to me. So I love being wrong. But I'm gonna probably not be involved in social media very much. I'm probably just gonna upload clips at this point in time of the podcast because I don't like feeding that validation. And this also goes into something that I kind of pieced together just this morning or yesterday was when I got jumped and my nose got super crooked, and you can kind of notice like which eye is it? I have one of these eyes where like the eyelid, there's a little white space between my iris and the lid of my eye. And so because the nerves there got damaged when my face got crushed as it was getting stomped in, and my nose was crooked there, right? So like if you compared my face now, my facial structure to what it was then when I was younger, you could tell a difference. And there was a time where my nose was like really crooked because of it. This was before I got facial reconstructive surgery. Second time. I think it was the second time. And so they straightened my nose down. But before that, there was a time there where I hated taking selfies. I hated it. I hated looking at pictures of myself because it reminded myself of what I used to look like. And then I got my nose straightened out. And even now, like that's kind of carried with me. I don't like taking selfies, but now it's like I have a combined kind of disdain for it in a way because of how it's used in social media and on the online digital space. And I think God used what the enemy meant for evil there with my disdain of not seeing myself because of what was done for me. I can see how God, if this was God, and I believe it is, because people can have a problem of just saying everything's God when really it's you just having hangups. But that's besides the point. Conversation for another time. But I can see, I really think so. I can see how if God called me to the digital space and the digital landscape, I can see how God used my disdain for taking selfies to now having me not idolize the things that are in the landscape he's called me to perform and minister within, right? Like if I'm called to go into this digital landscape and do this podcast and spread his word and show people how I use the Bible and his teachings and what he says and just share my thoughts and how he's grown me and the miracles he's performed in my life and others' lives. I can totally see how he used what happened to me getting jumped and it becoming a problem with me where I wouldn't want to take photos of myself ever. Now it makes me resistant to taking selfies and seeking validation on social media because I don't like taking pictures anyway of myself, right? Because of then. And I don't care what I look like now. Like I'm totally cool with what I look like now. Like I love myself, you know? Like Jesus's greatest command was love others like so what does he say? He was what did he say? One moment. Oh, let's see here. So the greatest commandment from Jesus says here, I just looked it up on Google real quick. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So I already know God's given me the wisdom enough to know that I have to love myself completely before I can love my neighbor correctly. And so I'm completely okay with what I look like now. That's not the issue, but I still have a disdain for I don't know what it is really. Taking pictures of myself when I don't really have a passion for that sort of thing, I guess, right? Like if I don't really take gym progress pics or anything like that because I don't feel if I ever felt like it would help somebody in a way where it would motivate them if they would look at me and my body and be like, "Man, I could look like that someday." Then sure, I would do it, but I think there's enough people out there to do it already to look at. They don't need my body up there. They don't need me doing that. Yeah, I'm in amazing shape for my age, and I do a lot of things, and that's great, both mentally and physically. But I just don't have a passion for putting pictures on social media, and I can totally see how God would have used my disdain for it that began with me getting jumped and hating how I looked in a way that was mentally unhealthy and sick because I was a victim of that jumping, right? I can see how God used that, what the enemy meant for evil, for his good, for my now, which is crazy. That's crazy. God's so good. God's good. He's so good. Man. And I think what time is it? 2:33. Yeah, man, there's been a lot of 3s, 7 and 8s in this season. So I think I'm going to stop there today and I'll pick this up next week. If God graces me with it, I will start uploading every week if I can become good enough with my editing skills to get this audio down. You know, the audio in the last episode wasn't perfect. There's kind of an echo in this room that I'm working on, and just please bear with me in my editing skills. It's just like any other skill, like my programming skill, my painting skill, my other artistic skills, martial arts skills, whatever. All the skills that I'm working on and growing my knowledge base of, like my theological knowledge base, like I grow that every day by reading the Bible right and leaning into God and where he leads me to grow these skills. And just like all of them, my audio and video editing skills will grow over time. So the podcast will become better and better and better. And I thank you so much for staying this long if you have. And if you would you please subscribe? I'd love to have you here and we can grow together. And if you have any questions, let me know. If you can relate to anything I was speaking on, or if you can't relate to it, if you want to argue with me, tell me I'm wrong. I'm okay. I love being wrong. I am completely okay with hearing other points of views because I sure hope that I'm not 100% correct, because that means I have nothing to learn. And that would be a tragedy. And with that, I'm going to call this a wrap. And I love you. And I thank you again for staying this long. And I'll see you next time. Peace.